We are hardwired to react more emotionally to the threat of a loss than we do to the potential for gain, especially when it's merely the potential for gain. Economists call this loss aversion. And because of this tendency, we place more value on what we already have, an endowment effect, and prefer to remain with that, a status quo bias, rather than roll the dice and take our chances on something better. So, what happens when we feel like we might be losing something? Well, the short answer is we want it more than we would have done had we not started to feel that loss. In fact, while we're indulging the kinds of biological tendencies we've mentioned in a previous post, we're also reinforcing them with the kinds of mental processes that marketers and many other types of influencers and manipulators might use on us to make it more likely we'll do things that we wouldn't normally do. For example, the scarcity principle states that what is scarce or not so available is considered more valuable than what is abundant or very available, and that the harder is something to come by, the more we will find ourselves wanting it. The scarcity principle also works better when something has become newly scarce. It's the reason we have limited time only sales and why so many internet companies tell you the quantity of each item they have left, but don't tell you there's a whole bunch of better quality ones coming the following week. If you can just be a little more patient. The fact is, we want something more when we feel we might lose it somehow. You know, like if it goes out with its friends and meets something else at a local bar or nightclub. And this process works especially well when we think we're competing with others for the same resource. Indeed, any marketer worth their salt would tell you the only thing more motivating than a limited supply of something is a rapidly diminishing supply of that same thing. Some of the research which proves this was done at the time using cookies. Though, of course, if you tell us the plain and ultimately less satisfying variety of cookie are pretty hard to come by, it probably won't make us go out and buy one, although we might if we didn't think we were deserving of a triple chocolate chip. The point is, you actually have to want the something in the first place. But once you do want that something, even just a little, it's the perceived scarcity of it which makes it seem all the more valuable. Imagine then what happens when you lose that one person who you suddenly decided, even if you were also thinking about breaking up with them, is the only person in the world you could be happy with in the future, even if you weren't really happy with them in the immediate past. Only now, you don't just want them. You've convinced yourself that you need them. This is the scarcity principle at work and earning double pay for its overtime. Although, to be honest, in most cases, it works better when there aren't another 4 billion in the world, as there are with men and women. We definitely don't think we want the plainer cookie quite so urgently if we knew Amazon still had that many remaining in stock, and we were deserving of, at very least, a whole truckload of them. The scarcer something is, not only does it appear more valuable, but we invest even more to get it. Think of the battles that rage in the last 10 seconds on eBay, where people pay more than something is really worth because they've already made that initial investment. But we don't just invest our money into the things we want, we invest our time, we invest our effort, we invest our thoughts, and we invest our emotions. And we want something in return for that investment. In fact, just like the gambler who ends up spending more and more money in an effort to win back the amount that was previously lost, we can end up wasting more and more of our time, effort, thought, and emotion in an attempt to save something that might not be worth saving. The difference here, however, is that while the gambler might win their money back, You will never get back the time, effort, thoughts, and emotions you've invested in your ex, no matter how things turn out in the future. These unrecoverable investments, or sunk costs as economists call them, should have no logical bearing on your current and future decisions. And yet, so often we continue to invest in something for the simple reason that we've invested so much already. When we do this, we might think to ourselves that we're just making sure the investment we've already made has not been done in vain. Yet, in reality, all we're really doing is wasting more time, more effort, more thoughts, and more emotions. Economists know this as the sunk cost fallacy. Cognitive dissonance is the name psychologists use to describe the discomfort we feel when the beliefs we have are challenged. And it can be particularly strong when the beliefs that are challenged are about ourselves. And even more so when the specific beliefs are especially important to us. For example, it may be important that you see yourself as a perfectly rational person, and yet you can't help but notice that the way you're acting right now is anything but rational. This, according to dissonance theory, gives you a decision to make. That is, you're either not the rational person you like to think you are, or there's some other reason, or more accurately, some justification for the way you're acting. In this respect, you could easily justify all that time, effort, thought, and emotion you're putting into getting them back if you work even harder to convince yourself that your ex-partner really is a special little cookie. And if you're acting a little crazy right now, then it's got to be down to the fact that you miss them and you can't function properly without them, right? Maybe you're just acting the same as anybody would after a breakup, and there's nothing you can do to stop that. Maybe you're just a little crazy enough, as Beyoncé once said, yet to justify the way you're acting even more, you'll still, no doubt, conjure up some memories of the good times, no matter how long ago they were, and you'll gloss all over the bad times, no matter how recent they are. And perhaps you'll even embellish the latter a little to make them seem a bit more like the good ones, if you can. When you do this, you fantasize that things will go back to the way they were, yet fail to realize how you've distorted reality in such a way that you've turned your relationship into something it never really was in the first place. Though, of course, by this point, you're not the only one who needs convincing about the virtues of your ex and the relationship you had together. You've got your friends involved now too, and you don't want them to think you're acting, let's say, a tad irrationally, especially if you want their help to get your ex back. So you tell them your story as well. And now they know how wonderful your ex is, and how incredible it was that such a plain and undeserving little cookie like yourself ever got themselves the merest taste of such baked perfection. Trust us, the old cliches you so readily share with your friends, like, you don't know what you've got till it's gone, are nothing more than those efforts you're making, either consciously or subconsciously, to justify those other efforts you're making to get back with your ex. Unfortunately, all this explaining and justifying, both to yourself and others, is engaging yet another psychological principle of influence, that of commitment and consistency. The commitment and consistency bias works alongside the aforementioned biases, and it states that once we make a decision, we will experience both internal and external pressure to stick to it. It also states that the more public that decision, and the more people who know about it, the greater the pressure we will feel. This is another reason why once we've started down the road of convincing everybody, including ourselves, how wonderful our ex is, we find it so hard to turn back. Instead, we just carry on immersing ourselves in that story, and sometimes to the point of suffocation. In essence, then, the more we invest in something or somebody, and the more we justify to ourselves and others that all the time, effort, thoughts, and emotion we put into obtaining it or them are worthwhile, the more convinced we become of its or their value. That is, the more we invest in something or somebody, the more attracted we become. And this, ironically, is especially true when we receive little or nothing in return for that investment.